We're going to start with Matt because he has the least complicated use case. So if you want to go ahead and explain what Ubiquity does, both in a easy to understand general sense and then a little more technical sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me? It's on? All right, cool. So I'm Matt McKibben. I'm the Director of Business Development for co-founder and Director of Business Development for Ubiquity. What Ubiquity does is that we use the Bitcoin blockchain. So you just heard the whole panel on the differences between little blockchains and big blockchains and all the ones that are out there, and it's a little bit confusing. What we do is we take the oldest, most secure blockchain in the world. We take an application layer that's built on top of it called colored coins. It's a colored coins layer. And we create a digital asset token that can be searched on another block explorer, another way of searching the transactions. And we are going to use that token. And basically, it's one little piece of Bitcoin, and you can track where that Bitcoin goes and who owns it. Okay, and we are going to say that is a property or a title, a real estate title. And so what we allow for you to do is to create an asset there, allow multiple parties, including title companies, real estate vendors, mortgage, whoever wants to put information that would be associated with the ownership of that property, and to write all of that information on. And then when you want to do a transaction, you can tie all of the appropriate mortgage documents, title documents, deeds of trust, and you can create a parallel system where you can trade that asset, that title, as if it was a real estate transaction. And so we actually did the first ever real estate transaction in the U.S. on a blockchain a couple weeks ago. Sotheby's International down in Virginia, Southern Virginia. It was the first one ever, and our partner, Marina Resnick, our Chief Real Estate Officer, she was the one that entered that information and tied all of the documents there. So that's, in a nutshell, what Ubiquity is doing, is creating a parallel real estate transaction platform to help all of the different parties communicate and put information together.
Thanks, Matt. Jason, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, so my name is Jason Dispenza. I'm the chairman of Energy Efficient Futures Foundations, and go to e2f2.us is our website. We've been looking at how you can create a standards and protocols around existing systems. My background is from the energy industry and cross sort of training into the health industry as well, but more government contracting. In complex systems where you've got a lot of people sort of already authenticating data, or getting work done in the world, or trying to create benefit for society, for instance, the fact that action happened is important. And so if you're recording the data about it, maybe in a combination of private and public blockchains, how are you connecting these things, to create and show value or to store the fact that data was performed? And so if you've got something that's important enough to track, and then if it's important enough to be widely accepted, maybe to consider that your token might one day become money, then you can tokenize some sort of credit asset. So it's kind of weird to think about up front, but if you're trying to model the energy industry, for instance, or the home performance industry of getting your homes improved, these are things that there's already existing infrastructures out there for, like, I approve that the work you did in your home made it more efficient by X, or you installed a solar system on your house and it's clearly producing electrons. And then furthermore, solar systems are also producing credits. The fact that a packet of energy was clean or was from solar, it's a solar credit versus a wind credit, or energy efficiency credit, which is a market that almost doesn't exist. It's only in 2 or 3 places, but the SREC market is something that's pretty big, and in DC it's a pretty important thing as far as getting systems installed, or to try and create community models where groups of peers can lend to each other or invest with each other or whatever to get work accomplished. So anyway, what E2F2 is trying to do right now is produce interoperability roadmaps on how blockchains or small blockchains can somewhat help either the energy sector or the health sector. I think that's Michelle.
Okay, and Ivan's going to try to explain one that I find incredibly complicated.
Okay. So my name is Ivan Zone. I'm a co-founder and CEO of SuchFlex. I don't think it's that complicated, but hopefully I'll try to explain it. So I guess we're analogous to Airbnb of computing. So we say the same way that Airbnb took rooms and physical assets that were underutilized and made them into one big kind of like global virtual hotel. We try to take computing resources that are underutilized in everybody's laptop, PC, smartphone, or gaming console, and we try to aggregate all of that and make it into one big global virtual hotel. We looked at, global computing market is expected to be over, $350 billion in less than 5 years. And if you look at all the underutilized computing resources of people's, laptops, smartphones, PCs, et cetera, it's like 3-4 times that. So it's just like this huge untapped opportunity. But at the moment, it's very difficult to get access to those computing resources, or at least it has been, in the past. So one of the things as it relates to this conference is, for us, we're kind of like a hybrid model. So we use blockchain technologies to get in the market. So we're already, we launched a couple of months ago. We have over 3,000 users, 300 to 600 daily users. And so that's like one part of it. And we kind of get the best of both worlds. So we have, all the benefits that the blockchain offers. But then we also have a managed portion of distributed computing where we bring on vendors and kind of hold their hand and take them through the process. So for us, it's it's a hybrid model, and we've taken advantage of some of the blockchain technologies that have come before us. So we kind of think ourselves a little bit as like a next generation kind of startup that builds on things that have already come before it.
Thanks. Okay, my first question is probably start with Matt. I'm going to equate this to traditional financial assets, but one of the kind of points of contention on tokenization is that with traditional financial assets all behave differently. So a stock might split and other assets might do other things. And so to say we can just tokenize anything is really not necessarily true. So could you talk through in terms of the products and services that you provide? I'm sorry, it's not that it's not true. It's not simple. It's not like we can tokenize this chair because this chair might have properties that behave in different ways that need a very scripted coding to make it work properly. So can you talk about, if you can speak to traditional financial assets, but also how it will work with the real estate and titles, what kind of things you need to consider to ensure that the token works properly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the blockchains, what you can do, the first application of the blockchain was a currency or a unit of account that you can trade freely between two people. The other applications that are going to continue are going to be smart assets, stocks, bonds, titles, smart property. You're going to be able to have that type of asset denote ownership, and whoever owns the private keys or the shared private keys to that will own it. I mean, I think it's, if you think about owning a stock certificate and having that piece of paper and having all of that, that sounds a little bit ridiculous in the age of 2016. In terms of real estate title and what we're doing here, we don't expect this to, be the ownership tomorrow. We expect it to build information on there. But in terms of securing all of the information about the title and having that be done over the course of time, it would be much easier to do a title search if every transaction was recorded onto a blockchain, and once it was recorded and transferred, you could see that had been transferred. All of the different parties that needed to had signed off. You weren't taking a 90-page real estate transaction with a PDF signing sheet at the end and passing around a bunch of emails. Maybe someone had seen the most current version, maybe they hadn't. But if you could do that on a publicly verifiable ledger where you know who was signing and when, what title company did what, it may not be perfect in terms of the information. There may be mistakes, but you can at least see what those mistakes are. For example, Goldman Sachs just came out with a report that said that there's about $5 billion worth of title fraud that needs to be corrected, and that blockchain technology is one of those technologies that can help. I think they believe, and this statistic might be slightly off, but I think it was about 60-70% of titles had some sort of defect in them. So if blockchain technology can at least do, even if it solves 10% of that problem, you're still solving a $500 million problem in the industry. But I said ours is a non-financial application in terms of we're putting all of the information in one area. And the more that system then is used and trusted, the more times that it's transacted amongst parties, you can go back and take a look at it and say, yes, all these parties signed, all these parties signed, all these parties signed, all the survey information, all of that is there. The more trusted that information is because people along the way haven't said, hey, this is a mistake. Similar to the Bitcoin blockchain where if those who are familiar with the confirmations, you used to have to wait 6 confirmations for any sort of transaction to go through and be certain that someone didn't spend the money somewhere else. So if you had a property that was built or transferred 6 times on the ledger, you could have a more certainty that there wasn't some sort of fraud or mistake in between.
Thank you. And yeah, just to add to that, there's a really great value that this can provide in the U.S. And like more developed markets, and then in less developed and underdeveloped markets, there's a lot of corruption that's different from the kind of fraud that we have in the U.S. So just even having property, like proof of asset ownership, is a concept that's like very difficult in a lot of places. So I think this opens that opportunity a lot as well.
Yeah, the development. I mean, I wrote a white paper for the World Bank in March and got to present on kind of where land titling and blockchain applications were, and now that is relevant because it's been 6 months. There's I think like $9 trillion worth of land according to Hernando de Soto and the Mystery of Capital, which is untitled. They have no way of titling it. They can't borrow against it. And I think Jamie of Bitfury would be able to speak about that as well. But blockchain technology doesn't necessarily give you the right information, but it allows you to permanently record that information, and then you can go from there. And so you don't, if there is corruption, you don't know what lie you're going to tell tomorrow, today, if it makes sense. So you're going to have to write something down, and you're going to have to reference that in the future. And if you gave the property to someone else, that will always be recorded. So
I'd like to spin off on this too. So we've talked a lot already about mapping real-world assets into a blockchain, and there's huge opportunity here to do that for almost anything, from chairs to properties and everything else that you might want to own, stock certificates and things. But within an elegantly designed permission system, if you're trying to replace a government program, for instance, then yes, you can give these actors in this program the different permissions that they've already got because they have a professional credential or a degree or whatever reason that they're allowed to say, yes, this is true. And so if you're believing that people that have degrees or have credentials can say, qualifyingly that you have, this medical treatment needed, or that you have done this work in your house, or that whatever, that in itself is becoming an asset. So, it's almost, the actions themselves, the data that's produced between, operators within a network or, citizens within a, community, as they record their interactions, across side chains or within and without the public blockchain, that this is what we're exploring as might be backed by a credit asset, and if credit assets are starting to become widely traded, like energy credits, that then you can tokenize them as well. So there's somewhat an intermediary here, a step that we've been trying to explore, for what's a real world asset that people are used to now, versus what are these new credit assets that are going to have to be created and terminology coined, to accomplish the goals of any specific government program, for instance, or any specific society's desired benefit. If you're going to fight climate change, if you're going to fight inequality, like how do you want to specifically solve that problem? What's the underlying least common denominator data set that you need to prove that something along those lines? You want a trash-free community? Well, how many pounds of trash did that person deliver back to the base station? If that's not proof that trash was collected, I don't know what else is, but that can underpin credit markets, that can help the government do better, rebates and incentives and business, if you call it that, with its citizens, taking this bureaucracy out of it.
That kind of opens the door for my next question, which is and probably to you, Jason. What kind of regulatory challenges are you facing? I think with energy credits, there's probably a lot of regulation there, and in like traditional financial assets and markets, there's a ton of regulation about those kinds of products, and the organizations or the companies that are working in that space now are already kind of credentialed, as you said, like they've done all of their compliance, check those boxes. What kind of challenges are you facing?
Wow. So within the energy industry alone, there's 2,000 independent utilities, and within each utility district, there's thousands and thousands of contractors. There's regulators that need metadata. There's homeowners that need to give permissions to contractors or rebate programs. Everyone's reinvented the wheel separately, each one of those 2,000 times, and they're all using expensive, IT, like Salesforce type of, programs to roll out. The same wheel's being reinvented at millions of dollars per wheel. And then furthermore, they're slow to adopt, and people have to relearn this stuff, and they don't really work. If you're a contractor, they don't work in one utility district to the next. There's two different ones you have to worry about. So regulation there is just like in many industries, a result of the fact that we haven't had blockchain, in the past. That complex systems had to get evolved to run any industry. So if you just map the complexity of that existing industry using permissions layers, that you can really accomplish, this proof of work goal. So it doesn't need to be on a single public blockchain, but like again, a handful of side chains running together, and people that have access and security tokens within each of those side chains can be approving, data as it comes along. So what's the data that you care about? And that could be as simple as, eating a vegan meal that somehow improves the public health, nationwide, whatever a tiny fraction that is, there is some finite value there. So whatever your goals are in this room of what you want to try and change, figure out what that is and work from the change outward, and then we'll see how, you might be working within your industries or whatnot to, try and help get that applied. But as far as regulation goes, you need to be able to try and, for the federal government, show them how they're going to save costs, do business more efficiently, more privately and securely, and that's really their most important components or qualities. But globalization is a word that if it comes out in discussion with the federal government, your conversation ends. So like they're very much more short-sighted, and they need to see how they can improve programs now, over the 5 to 10 year period. And that, while subtly underpinning a lot of these ideas might be something that scales globally very easily.
So in sum, what I'm hearing is the regulatory challenges for these industries are not unique to blockchain. These are just these industries, these various use cases, existing regulatory challenges, and blockchain can maybe reduce some of those.
Well, almost every industry, from insurance to energy to automotive to agriculture, like all of them are going to have to face a really big technological upgrade. One way or the other, and they're going to have to wrap their heads around all the entities that are working within their current industry. And some of our early work at E2F2 is, not only try to suggest that the energy industry specifically does this, but if you've got multiple industries that are all looking at redesigning how they operate within themselves, then what can you create between big industries? So for the energy industry, for instance, we want more funding to do more projects. I want to do more solar, I want to do more energy efficiency. And from that goal, came this desire, this need for more funding from other sources, perhaps. So like the work that's being done there is actually improving the public health, for instance. Every time you make a house tighter and remove its pollutants, the occupants live in a slightly cleaner way. Or every time you install a water filter, and you take out all the horrible things in Flint, Michigan, like you're improving the occupants' health in a very substantial way. So like, what's the value to the public health there? Or the fact that why is just the energy services industry bearing this cost? And the question that we're trying to get answered and then solve through regulation to try and create some guidelines and some protocols around how credit classes might be created or what might make them ubiquitous across all these independent programs is specifically to try and bring funding in to do more stuff from one industry that might appear unrelated, on the surface, but really is receiving benefit because, the work that's done on another side might, apply to them.
Okay, I have one question for Ivan, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the audience. So if I'm a researcher, let's say I've done a big study on cancer, and I'm a grad student researcher, so I don't have access to a supercomputer. Can you explain to me why your company, how your company can help someone like me? And then could you explain how blockchain technology specifically enables your company to help me?
Sure. So I guess there's two different ways. One is, like you mentioned, you don't have access to a supercomputer. So the big advantage of our platform and having, contributors that are just regular people is it's sort of, almost very scalable, and our costs are much lower than you would encounter otherwise. The way the blockchain technologies help us are sort of like, I can mention two different aspects of it. One is, like, we're building a computational marketplace, and typically with marketplaces, one of the biggest problems of getting it started is a chicken and egg problem, where you need somebody to pay for, some big project that they want computed or rendered, et cetera. And in order to get them, you need a critical mass of people. But then, to attract a critical mass of people, you need to incentivize them. So it's difficult to match that in the beginning. So existing blockchain technologies allow us to just tap into existing networks and bring people in. And because this kind of comes back to my second point, is because these networks have proof of work, proof of stake algorithms. There's no, it kind of, we always talk about like getting rid of the middleman, right? Which is like what blockchain is very good at. So by getting rid of the middleman, it becomes very seamless, and just technologically you can onboard contributors onto the network, very easily. So I hope that answers your
So
question.
the efficiencies and the ability to transact in real time, essentially.
Yeah,
open
those
that
as
door.
well.
If anyone from the audience has any questions, we have a few minutes left. Come on up.
Nice panel. Thank you, everybody. The question is about real estate. Interestingly enough, I spent some time on condo and HOA document world. So in the state of Maryland, if you do a transaction, you fail to give the proper documents, the seller can actually sue the buyer for not disclosing. So how are you, if you're going to do a seamless transaction, going to go and get these cat-like documents that are everywhere and no central depository?
Oh, right, and so what we're doing, what we're starting is really small. Some of our first clients that are coming on board are the small houses, the tiny house markets, and and also ones where they have all the documentation, they get it all together, and they want to put it in one place, make sure that it's secure and it can't go away, so it eliminates the missing errors. We will not be responsible for putting all of that information onto the system. We are going to rely on the title companies and the real estate developers and them to put the information on, show where they're public key. So we're trusting that they have a reputation that they're going to put the correct information on our system. And we actually have no control over what the information is anyway.
Well, here's a follow-up, and this is, the World Bank should have seen this. This is a big issue overseas because they sell condominium units, and those are like vaporware because there's no central depository. So I applaud this effort, but I think you guys someone might want to look a little bit bigger, because the depository of the documents, unless you have them, you can't actually do any of the transactions, and the majority of homes are now in condo HOAs.
I mean, yeah, you can do any real estate transaction on here. You can create that token for any condo, for anything, and you can fill out all the form fields, put all of the documents up there for any asset.
Okay, so it's not being built in yet. That's all I was just trying to check out.
It's not being built in. We're pre-alpha right now.
Yeah, so my question is
gentle.
also on
Go gentle.
real estate, because I took the other side of that one. So are you actually storing the details of the contract into the Bitcoin blockchain? Like, how are you doing that? And do you see the public Bitcoin blockchain as like, a free storage unit of like the world's database? Because I'm not sure why, the world owes industries, a free place to store anything they like. Like, where's the cost? Like, how are you compensating the blockchain for this?
Can I jump in to interject? I think that notarization perhaps might be a big solution for that. So, in the energy industry, we need to try and record heartbeat data of every energy monitor everywhere. Like, you don't want that in the blockchain. So you might have node operators or people that are incentivized to like try and authenticate some of this information, which will be a notary receipt that exists in the blockchain that can be then looked up, in other locations.
So what we actually do, we're using Colu and the Colorcoins applications layer, which is just a torrent layer underneath to store all the metadata, and then the individual transactions will be hashed onto the blockchain.
But the details of the contract, how are those immutable in your structure?
I mean, the details of the contract aren't immutable, but all of the documents and all of the form fields that are going on there, we could eventually use something like rootstock for a smart contracts application. But basically creating that asset, putting it up there, and then you can transfer that asset to someone else, and you can at least see that the asset was transferred and that all of the parties had signed with their public.
But I think your question is about preventing fraud, right? So like, you immutable to the extent that you trust the title agent or title attorney.
Well, no, my question is like right now we use title companies because they're like the insurer. If you go to a blockchain model, who's insuring this? And like, what happens if I send my title through the blockchain to someone else accidentally?
I don't know, very abstractly, but I don't know. I feel like this is like the same process that happened on an assembly line. You had all these assembly line workers. Now you have, it's not that there's no people on the assembly line. It's just that there's a lot less. For every 10 that you use, you need whatever. You need one that kind of handles, manages the robots. I think with these blockchain disruptions, a lot of the same thing happens where it's not completely replacing the whole process. It's like replacing, bits, and then some parts are managed by people and by experts.
So I would say that right now we're trusting third parties, the title companies, to put the information on because they are trusted in society and they have a reputation. Once you reveal your public key that I am this company and I am putting this information on, so that you can at least go back. I would say that we want to create that history as we go through, and eventually we're not allowing end users. So if you're a homeowner, you're not going on and you don't have a key to transfer everything. We're allowing the businesses to write the information and share that they've signed off. But eventually, I do see in 10 years that every real estate transaction would be tracked with the title coin. It would just make sense that you would want to record that information on the worldwide ledger, right? So
I'll end it there.
we can talk later. Yeah, sure.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you to all our panelists. This was really enlightening.